Welcome back. Learning Tanya, chapter 42. Actually, going to complete chapter 42. And today's lesson is one should train the mind to view the world as the outer garment of the king. To view the world as the outer garment of the king, which consequently brings an awareness of the king. So if we are capable of viewing the world as the outer garments of the king, then it brings an awareness of the king. We'll be aware of the king, the one inside those layers of clothing. In describing the fear a Jew should possess for God, the Alter Rebbe said that it should be similar to the fear felt when one stands before a king. For God is omnipresent and observes all man's actions. A question arises: when one stands before a king, he is not only being seen by the king, but he is also looking at him. And this helps him to stand in fear of him. In the analog, however, this is not the case. Though God, the king, sees him, he fails to see God. Another thing to remember: when it comes to a king of flesh and blood, the primary source of fear is not from his body, it's from his chayus, from his energy, from his presence. His inner essence and vitality. Because when someone is asleep, and you know that he's not waking up anytime soon, there's no fear of him. This is because while he sleeps, his inner essence and vitality are in a state of concealment. Clearly then, they are the main reason for fearing a king while he is awake. If you are aware of what? Of his inner essence and vitality. His inner essence and vitality are not perceived, his inner essence and vitality are not perceived by physical eyes, but only by the mind's eye, meaning being aware that there's something there, not necessarily seeing it, but understanding that something is happening. Through the physical eyes, beholding his body and garments, and knowing that his vitality is closed in them, in turn leads the beholder to fear him. And if this is so, then surely in the analog as well, not only the king seeing him, but he is seeing the king. And this causes him to fear God. Moreover, he must truly likewise fear God when gazing with his physical eyes at the heavens and earth and all their host. Wherein is the infinite light of Hashem is enclosed in them to give them life, to give life to the heaven, to the earth, and all their host. The Alter Rebbe will now say that by looking at heaven and earth, one not only becomes aware of the godly vitality, vitalizing force, but also perceives how the world and all its inhabitants are truly nullified to the divine life force. וגם נראה בראיית העין שהם בטלים לאור יסבוך והשתחוואוסם כל יום כלפי מעלה ובשקיעוסם מים וכמים רבי סנו ז"ל פסוק צבא שמיים לכם בשטחים ששכינו מעלה. It's also something that can be seen with a glance of the eye, that they are nullified to his blessed light by the fact that they prostrate themselves every day, they bow down every day toward the west at the time of the setting. As the rabbis of blessed memory commented on the verse, and the host of the heavens bow before you. Tzva Shomayim, the host of heavens, bow before you, L'chom Mishtachim, that the Shechina abides in the west. V'nimtza iluchom kol hayom klape ma'arav derech hishtachavo uvitu. Hence, not only do the heavenly host show their self-abnegation when they set in the west, but their daily orbit westward is kind of prostration and self-nullification. Even if you never saw the king, you don't know him at all, you can't even recognize him, but nevertheless, when you're walking into Chatzar HaMelech, then you're walking into the royal courtyard, you see the dignitaries, eminent nobles, and you see they're all prostrating themselves before one man, they're all bowing to the king. Now he right away, the one who sees it, falls on him a dread and awe. So too, the self-nullification before God shown by the awesome creatures such as the heavenly bodies enables one to be in fear and awe of the king. However, the question may be asked, when one gazes at the body of a physical king, he sees before him, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what do you see? You see the king himself. He therefore can extrapolate intellectually about the inner essence and vitality of the king and come to fear him. This is not so, however, with regard to physical creatures. The divine life force is so concealed within them through so many garbs of concealment that it is quite possible for one to gaze at them and fail to be aware that their bodies are but garment to the divine life force they contain. And although many garments are involved in this vestiture, so that when one gazes at created beings, one does not perceive that there are but garments to their divine life force. There's no difference when it comes to a mortal king, whether he is wearing one shirt or 5 shirts. In this, it is the realization that the king is found within the garments that creates the fear of him. And the same, the Alter Rebbe will conclude, is true here. When a person becomes accustomed to remember that when he gazes upon created beings, he is in reality gazing upon the king's garments, he will then come to fear him. There's a famous anecdote that when the Alter Rebbe was on his deathbed, and he was laying in his bed, he looked at the beam and he said, I don't see the beam, I see the godly vitality that gives life to the beam. So this is really what this essay is telling us. Is in maybe I would say in our language is to say to see beyond the facade. That's really what is telling us. The essential thing, however, is the training to habituate one's mind and thought continuously, so that is always remain imprinted in his heart and mind. Asher kol mashu beinov, that anything that you see, the heaven, Hashomayim, ve'oretz, and the earth, u'meloyo, and all they contain, ha'koilem levushim achitzonim, all of it is external garments, outer garments, shel HaMelech HaKadosh Baruch Hu, outer garments of the King, the Holy One, blessed be He. V'al dei zeh, in this way, Yizkor Tomid, it will constantly remember their inwardness and vitality, which is godliness. This will create within him a fear of God. The Rebbe explains that what now follows answers a question. How can we possibly say here that the nullification of the world to God is a concept that can be perceived intellectually, when in chapter 33 the Alter Rebbe explained that this is a matter of faith? In this chapter 2, we have learned that it is a matter of faith, that all Jews are believers, descendants of believers, and so on. Faith and intellect are not only distinct entities, they are antithetical, right? I said it right, Shmuel?
Antithetical.
Antithetical. For example, when something is understood, faith is not necessary. The Alter Rebbe, therefore, now goes on to explain that this intellectual perception is also implicit in the word emunah, faith. For this word is etymologically. Thank you.
Word.
No, not so bad. Etymologically, rooted in the word uman, artisan. So emunah and uman, faith and artisan. Emunah is faith, and uman, aleph, vav, mem, nun, is artisan. In order for an artisan, with his talent for painting, creating vessels, or whatever, to be successful, he must habituate and train his hands. Only then will they reveal the talent or the latent talents of the artistry found in his soul. So not only to train his mind, he has also to train his hands. The same is true here. The soul, every Jew possesses the above mentioned faith. So the soul of every Jew possesses the above mentioned faith. However, in order for this faith to be actualized, so that one's actions will be consonance with it, one must habituate and train himself to realize that all he sees, heaven and earth, and all of creation are but God's external garments. By constantly remembering that their inwardness is godliness, the soul's essential faith will be revealed and will affect one's action. His bodily organs will then follow the dictates of his faith. This is also implicit in the word emunah. What does emunah means? Which is term indicating training, uman, like we said before, someone that trains himself, to which person habituates himself. Like a craftsman who trains his hands and so forth. So the Rebbe notes that the reason the Alter Rebbe now goes on to say there should also be is that until now it has been explained how a Jew generates the fear of heaven through intellectual contemplation. The degree of fear he arouses will correspond to the extent of his contemplation. The degree of fear he arouses will correspond exactly to the extent of his contemplation. The deeper the contemplation, the greater his fear. It also depends how much each individual is governed by his intellect. Furthermore, it is too much to expect that all people constantly achieve a state of intellectual awareness. Yet all people are obliged to stand in constant fear of heaven. The Alter Rebbe therefore now goes on to say, or goes on to elaborate on a frame of mind which can be and must be, or which can and must exist constantly. Acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. This is not attained through contemplation, rather it comes as a result of faith alone. And this state can exist constantly in all individuals. V'gam li'is lizikoron tamid. There should also be a constant remembrance. Loshen chachamenu zal. It is constant because it does not depend on prior contemplation, but rather on pure faith. Of the dictum of the sages of less memory, Kabbolas oil malchus shomaim shu keinyan soim tosim olecho melech. Acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, which parallels the injunction, you shall appoint a king, which is referring to God. You shall appoint a king, God over you. As has been explained elsewhere and so on. This is also what the Alter Rebbe says earlier in Tanya, beginning of chapter 41. Even though after all this meditation, no fear or dread descends upon him in a manifest manner in his heart, still he should accept upon himself God as his king and accept upon himself the yoke of the heavenly kingdom, as the Alter Rebbe explains there. This attribute is found within every Jew in a sincere manner because of the nature of Jewish souls not to rebel against God, the King of Kings. This level of fear can therefore also always be present. For God, blessed be He, forgoes the creatures of the higher and lower worlds. They are not the ultimate intent of creation, and uniquely bestows His kingdom upon us, and we accept the heavenly yoke. This is the reason why we are bowing in Shemoneh Esrei, and this is the significance of the obeisance. In the prayer of the 18 benedictions, the 18 blessings, following the verbal acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven in the reading of Shema. When we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, and so on. Whereby one accepts it once again in actual deed, and so on. For by bowing in the course of the prayer of the Amidah, one shows one's acceptance in actual deed of one's self-nullification to God, as is explained elsewhere. So the takeaway from today's essay, which completes chapter 42 in Tanya, you don't see God, but that does not mean you don't see His garments. You can still see His garments. The world is God's masterpiece. God is hidden behind the beauty of this world. Think about this constantly, that God is hidden behind the beauty of the world, and this will become your normal vision of reality. You'll be able to see beyond and above the facade of the world. Bruchim Tiyu, and should all be blessed with whoever needs refuah shalema, should have refuah shalema, and all the blessings. I'm going to have another short video coming up with a daily parsha insight, Geula and Yaakov. I'll see you soon.